now that we've gone through these six uh, minimal facts for the evidence of the resurrection,
Sure.
it's been an intellectual conversation for the most part, right?
Yeah.
I think it would. I think we'd be remiss not to make this personal.
Absolutely.
And what I mean by that is, uh, it's one thing to know the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, and that's all great and dandy. It's important. Apologetics in and of itself is important.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the danger that we run into oftentimes in apologetics is we leave it at the intellectual and hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not until it becomes personal that true conversion takes place.
Absolutely. A lot of people can miss heaven by 16 inches.
Yeah.
That's the distance from the head to the heart.
Yeah. And we want to be careful on this platform not to get so caught up in the intellectual that we miss the spiritual and the personal. We are back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Identity Christ Is podcast, where we endeavor to give an answer for the hope that lies within us, yet doing so with gentleness and respect. I am your co-host, Jaylen Thompson.
Dylan Schweitzer.
Dylan, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing pretty good, man.
Yeah?
Feeling pretty good. How are you?
I'm good on this cold Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cold today. Like, this winter's been pretty mild here in Chicago, but it's cold today.
Yeah, a little bit chilly, a little nippy.
Yeah, but it's okay though. It's okay though. We're still here to record some content. Make sure you guys follow us on Facebook and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can push this up the algorithm so more people can see it. Share this content as well. What do we got on the docket today?
Today, we're going to do a follow-up to our previous episode talking about evidences for the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth.
Part 2.
So last time we met, we talked about something called the minimal facts argument.
Right.
The minimal facts argument. And so the purpose of it is just to show a bare bones representation of historical data that most historians agree upon that constitute evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. So we talked about 3 of them last week. We're going to talk about 3 more today. There's technically 12 in the minimal facts argument.
Yeah.
We're just picking 6 that we thought would be fun to talk about.
Right.
We encourage you to kind of dive deeper into this on your own. Don't listen to just us. Check our information. Fact check us, please. Dive in and do your own research. This is just kind of a surface level conversation from a couple of laymen that want to talk about this.
Yeah, and also too, we're going to provide plenty of links to different articles, different research that you guys can look into in the YouTube description. So you guys have plenty of content there for you to take a look at. Like we said, please don't take our word for it and say Jaylen and Dylan said anything. Don't do that. So
could you imagine?
Yeah, please don't. So let's get into this, man. So
and the lights come down. The minimal facts argument.
Right.
Last week we talked about number 1.
Right. Go ahead. Go about last week.
That Jesus died by crucifixion.
Yep.
That very soon afterwards, his followers had real experiences that they thought were actual appearances of the risen Jesus.
That's 2.
3, that their lives were transformed as a result, even to the point of being willing to die specifically for their faith in the resurrection message. This week, the next 3 we're going to talk about. Number 4, the empty tomb. 5, that James, Jesus' unbelieving brother, became a Christian due to his own experience that he thought was the resurrected Christ. And lastly, number 6, that the Christian persecutor Paul, formerly Saul of Tarsus, became a believer after a similar experience. So let's dive into the first one of our grouping today. Number 4, the empty tomb. Was there even an empty tomb, Jaylen? I don't buy it.
Let me go here.
All right.
So yes, there was an empty tomb. That is one of the minimal facts. You know something? If this were not a fact, we wouldn't have a minimal facts argument.
Fair enough.
Here's the reason why. Something happened to the body of Jesus. Jesus was executed publicly in Jerusalem. Okay, crucifixions in this time was a public execution that took place. It was meant to be embarrassing. It was meant to be humiliating, and it was meant to also deter people from committing crimes against the Roman government as well.
Brutal.
As well as their Jewish council friends and political friends in high places. And so when we look at what happened with Jesus, he's executed publicly in Jerusalem, and also the reports of his first post-mortem appearances were in Jerusalem as well. So something happened to the body of Jesus. It would have been different if he was executed publicly in Jerusalem, but then we hear about him appearing in
Nova Scotia,
sure. No, let's go with that. Nova Scotia even a country? I don't know. Anyway,
maybe.
let's go with
Random
that.
place.
Random place. We hear about him appearing in a random place. What's interesting is that he was executed publicly in Jerusalem, which was verifiable. And so when the reports come around about his first postmortem appearances being in Jerusalem as well, wait a second, what can we do here to either nip this in the bud or verify that something is taking place?
Right.
Let's go to the tomb.
Yeah.
Right? So the four Gospels record that Jesus was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph of Arimathea was a member of the Jewish council.
Which, to clarify, the people that killed Jesus.
Yes. As a whole, there were people within the council that were not participants.
Yes, thank you for clarifying.
They did not agree with this. But the leadership, the most influential people in the council, were very much for the crucifixion of Jesus. So this doesn't make sense, obviously, if there's a dead corpse inside of the tomb, and we know exactly where he is, where his body is. Obviously, we don't because we weren't around 2,000 years ago. But people who crucified Jesus, those who wanted Jesus dead, very easily, if they're hearing rumblings about Jesus, could very easily, why don't we just go to the tomb? And when we get to the tomb, we ought to see this heavy rock this heavy boulder, I should say, that we put in front of the tomb to close it with a Roman seal in front of it, because that's what they put in front of the tomb because the Roman soldiers were guarding the tomb.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we ought to see when we walk up to the tomb. Well, the Gospels record that on the third day after Jesus had been crucified, all four of them record this, that women were the first people or first eyewitnesses to see Christ's empty tomb.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that important? Gospels, these four Gospels were written by Jews. Okay? And in first century Jerusalem or first century Judea, the sexism of that time was off the charts.
Unfortunately, yes.
It was incredibly off the charts. Women couldn't even testify in court without a man being present.
Mm-hmm.
A woman couldn't serve as an eyewitness for much anything. Her words were virtually non-existent. She might as well not even spoken about anything.
Yeah, you could have a group of women all witnessing a murder, and because they're women, their testimony was not valid in court. And in fact, a child's testimony, a male child's testimony, was weighted way higher than a woman's.
Yes, absolutely. But then you have these four Gospels here that record this empty tomb, and they record women being the first ones to see it. If this is made up, this whole resurrection of Jesus is made up, and you want someone to actually believe the lie.
That is the stupidest lie I've ever heard.
Well, yeah, in first century Jerusalem, absolutely.
Right.
This lie doesn't leave Jerusalem because they easily say, well, wait a second, who'd you say saw it? Oh, it was 3 women who saw it. No, we don't. That's not how we operate here. We don't follow the testimony of women.
Right.
There no men saw it. Nope. It was women were the first one to see it, and then they came back and told us what happened. Nope. Not buying it. It's a hoax. Yeah, that's how that should have gone in that culture.
Right. Yeah, it's a very what's the word I'm looking for here? It is not a productive means to fabricate a story by using the worst viewed witnesses to proclaim the resurrected Jesus.
Yes.
If I was trying to make up a religion about a resurrected figure, I would not be using that.
No,
I would
not in that time.
Yeah, in that time period, I would have. If I was like one of the disciples, I would have pushed the boulder over myself, and I carried Jesus out, and then I went and consoled the women afterwards, and about how manly I was, or something ridiculous like that. I would make myself look good, and I would, of course, jokingly, but. Sure. Yeah, like that would be a much more realistic lie than using the worst possible way to get it out.
Yeah,
I think it kind of showcases the truth of the matter. Like, why would why if you were going to make a lie, couldn't you make something even half more convincing?
Yeah, and we're not saying that because women were recorded as the first to see the empty tomb that automatically makes it true. What we are saying is that it does have the ring of authenticity, though, because if I were telling a lie, I'd tell it in such a way that makes it more believable than this for first century Jerusalem, which actually brings us to our next point. about the empty tomb, which is the embarrassing details of the empty tomb point. Do you want to
Yeah,
talk a little more about that?
absolutely. So there's so many little things about that. So, for example, we could take the aspect of the fact that they couldn't find the body. And so if you go to the Jewish courts and you're like, hey, we can't find the body, if they wanted to shut up the early Christians, they would just go to the tomb and be like, hey, here's the body. He's not risen.
Sure.
They're hallucinating or whatever.
Parade them around town.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. But they said, no, you must have stole the body. It was like, well, why would you say that if you had the body? That doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, and it implies that the tomb is empty. Then,
yeah, and
even if you're implying, even if you say I stole the body, you're implying the tomb is empty.
Right. You're what's the word? Implicitly agreeing to that together.
Yes.
And so the story that goes around is like, oh well, while the Roman guard was sleeping, the disciples stole the body, which is kind of a ridiculous statement, especially if the Roman guard is saying that. It's just like, yeah, while I was sleeping, in my sleep, I noticed that the disciples stole the body. It's like, you were sleeping. How could you have noticed that?
Mm-hmm.
So,
and how did they move this giant boulder, which, this giant 2-ton boulder
quietly? While the centurion is sleeping.
Doesn't make any sense.
That doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make much
it would be a miracle to believe it.
That was a good one.
But if you kind of zoom out from the empty tomb in general, there's so many embarrassing details from the gospel that is shared that kind of showcase the truth that the writers of the New Testament and the Gospels held to. So, for example, like if I was making up a religion, I would not make myself look like a fool. So, a great example of this is oftentimes the disciples are not portrayed as smart. They're portrayed as pretty dim-witted often. So, like one example I could give to this is in John 3, and the disciples are going up to him and they're asking about. So they ask him something, and Jesus kind of pivots and just kind of changes the subject in a sly way, and said, "No man can see the kingdom of heaven unless he be born again." And I feel dumb, but every time I read this, because they sound so silly, I almost imagine it in like a really hick Southern accent, and I'm like, and they basically respond, they're like, well, Jesus, how could you be born again? What you gonna do? Crawl inside your mother's womb? And that's how I read it. And it's just so funny to me because you sound so stupid. And it's really, and it's funny because I was reading a John MacArthur study Bible today, and in the notes he says that born again in the Greek refers to being born from above. And so it's already explicit. And so I just immediately go to like my hick accent in my head. I'm like, you guys sound so stupid. And this is riddled all over the Gospels.
Yeah, especially in the parables. When they get to the parables, I don't remember where it is in the Gospels, but there was one time where Jesus was teaching and he was giving the parables, and the disciples were there, and then it was like a big crowd of people. And then when the people left, they walked up to Jesus and were like, so can you explain that again?
Yeah, like what? We didn't quite get that. Like what?
Yeah,
it was so funny, and he's like breaking it down. Like he's basically like, you don't get this parable, you're not going to get the rest of it.
Yeah,
okay, pay attention this time.
Yeah, and he's like, what do you mean? You don't understand what I just said? And they're like, nope,
not at all. And more so, to push it further, Peter is referred to as Satan by God, by Christ. Like, that's not a flattering thing to say. The adversary, as he's referred to.
I'm not putting it in my biography.
And so Peter is also, it's documented that he denied Christ 3 times.
Again, he cursed out a little girl in the process.
Right. It's another embarrassing detail that I wouldn't want in there if I was making up a religion. And then they run away.
Yeah, when he got arrested.
Yeah, like little girls. And then ironically, the brave ones in this giant story are the women.
Yep.
The women who go to the tomb and discover it and proclaim the good news.
And actually stay throughout the entire crucifixion process. They're the ones that stay, and all the men see the Roman guards coming and take off running.
Now, remind me, Jaylen, who wrote the Gospels? Was it women or
4 dudes?
4 dudes. But it begs the question, what kind of man?
Jewish men.
Jewish men. Well, I meant like not very manly men.
Oh, no, not at all.
Like these weren't. And so these guys were honest. They were true. about what happened.
Yep.
So much so they were willing to include all these embarrassing details. And there's so many more riddled throughout the gospel accounts, even about each other and about Jesus as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it points to the aspect of their ability and desire to uphold to truth.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with the women aspect that we kind of referred to, is just another example that if I was making up a story about and trying to create a religion, it's not the way I'd do it.
No, not like I said, not specifically in the culture in which they wrote their story.
Yeah.
So let's get back to the Jewish Council in the Roman Empire. They had plenty of motive to produce the body of Jesus with this whole empty tomb thing. There was plenty of motive because you got to remember, they wanted nothing more than for this whole Jesus crowd, the gatherings, the people flocking to them, the pandemonium and all. They wanted all this stuff to stop. So they had plenty of motive when all these rumors and all these rumblings of appearances of Jesus are going around to say, you know what, guys, let's go to the tomb and let's get the body. Question that I have is, why didn't they do that?
Right.
Certainly I'm not smarter than them and just came up with that idea right here, right now. Right. I mean, I'm okay in terms of intelligence, but I'm not that smart. I very seldom do I have like good ideas. But why didn't they do that? Why didn't they just produce the corpse? They didn't do that. And so I think finally, as it relates to this empty tomb, minimal fact, there's no competing burial story in existence as it relates to, oh no, he wasn't buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. He was buried over here. Oh, they never buried him. There's none of that in history that's recorded.
In terms of historical data lining up to that explanation about where he was buried, we have good accounts from biblical and non-biblical sources about his burial.
Right. And even historian and skeptic Michael Grant, he concedes that that no historian can justifiably deny the empty tomb, since applied historical criteria show that the evidence is firm and it's plausible to necessitate the conclusion that the tomb was in fact empty.
Right. Yeah. So the question is why it was empty. Again, this is one of the many facts. It's kind of a cumulative case. It's not saying tomb's empty, therefore Christianity is true. But if that fact is true, in line with a lot of other pieces of evidence, it kind of makes the case, a cumulative case for Christianity. So I think that's
by the way, just really quick, by the way, we still haven't found his body.
That's true. I've been looking, man.
And we do all kind of excavations, and we dig in the Middle East more than we dig anywhere. Probably, there's a whole lot of archaeological studies going on in the Middle East. We still haven't found his body.
Nothing.
Highly doubt you're going to find it here in America. By the way, you should probably stop looking. But anyway, minimum fact number 5.
So yeah, minimum fact number 5 is that James, Jesus's unbelieving brother, became a Christian due to his own experience of seeing what he thought was the resurrected Christ. Now, Jaylen, before we even get to some of the information, you have 4 brothers, correct?
5.
Imagine,
5 brothers.
Was James younger or older brother of Jesus? Would be younger, right?
James, I believe, was older than Jesus.
Was older.
Yeah.
No. What would it take for your older brother Trey to convince you that he was the chosen one, the Son of God?
Oh my goodness.
What would it literally take for him to convince you?
It's going to be something miraculous. There is no way Trey is going to convince me.
Yeah, he can't just tell you?
I love my big brother, but there is no way. I can't take your word for this one. I can't do it, Slime. I can't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes something miraculous. It has to be. Has to be something miraculous. I don't know what. Perhaps a death and a foretold death and resurrection, but it'll take something to convince me that, oh, dude, I'm related to God.
Oh, that's great. So you could probably relate to James's situation growing up because his entire life being Jesus's half brother, he never believed that Jesus was who he proclaimed to be. In fact, in John 7:5, the Gospel of John records that Jesus' own family members did not believe in him. And so it also says all of a sudden something happens and James not only became a believer, but also a leader in the early church. That's a radical change in perspective.
Very radical.
What could account for such a change is the big question for that.
Exactly.
Is it just simply that he thought the message was cute and wanted to die for the message? That doesn't really make sense to me. I
No.
mean, people don't even die for lies they believe in.
Right. No, absolutely. And in James's case, uh, I mean, not only did he become a church leader, his letter actually ends up in scripture as well. And he in his letter, in studying James's life, especially as an early church leader, he very much he practices what he preached in the letter in terms of uh showing us what he believed
Yeah.
by the way that he carried himself in the early church, by his devotion to the development of the early church. Um, James, something happened with him that, I mean, the level of conviction
Yeah, it's
that,
astonishing when you read the Epistle of James.
yeah, and the level of conviction that this guy had to go from, he's out of his mind. They thought Jesus was crazy. His family thought he was crazy,
Hmm.
actually. To go from that to, no, he's not crazy. This is the truth, and I'm willing to
Right.
die about it.
Yeah.
And history actually records that he did die about it. He was martyred, and it's attested to by Josephus, a second century historian by the name of, I'm about to mess this up.
Ruh-roh.
Is it Hegesippus? Hegesippus.
It is now.
Yep, I like it. And Clement of Alexandria, who was a second century apologist and theologian. They all attest to him being being martyred. I'm sorry,
Hmm.
for his faith in Christ. It's actually recorded that he was pushed from the top of the temple, and he was stoned on the ground when he was pushed from the
And
top
not
of
the
the
fun
temple.
kind.
No, he was no, not that stoned. He not Americanized stoned. This is boulders to your skull stoned.
Jeez. Yeah.
Yes.
And so I would say at that point, if I made this up or I was lying about this, if I was having to give my life up for it,
Mhm.
even if the message was very beautiful, I wouldn't go to that extent.
Yeah.
I don't know of anyone else who would if they knowingly knew it was a lie.
Hmm. And the fact that he was related to him also lends a lot of credibility
Yeah,
to it
because
as well.
that's a higher ratio or barrier of evidence needed to
Hmm.
change your position on that, especially if it's a position you've had for like decades,
Hmm.
literally. I mean, so if, like he's probably around 30, so that's like 3 decades of having one perspective and then a radical transformation, not just changing your mind passively, but about becoming a leader and spearheading a movement about a historical event that happened.
Absolutely. So that takes us to our last minimal fact that we're going to discuss for the night.
The Christian persecutor Paul, formerly Saul of Tarsus, also became a believer after a similar experience.
And by similar experience, we mean the one that James had. So who was Saul of Tarsus? We're going to call him Saul.
Solly
His
boy.
original name.
Yes. So Saul was a Christian persecutor. He was famous for his ties to Jewish culture as a leader and killing Christians.
Mhm.
That's right. That's
I thought you were going to keep talking like with the way you were talking. I thought you had like
Nope,
more like
short and sweet introduction. I think that kind of puts it to the point.
you kind of sound like the guy off The Price is Right or something. But so that's who he was. And also, Saul had legal authorization to kill Christians wherever he found them as well. So he had legal authorization to do this. Keep that in mind. He had legal
just bypass
authorization.
that commandment, right?
Yeah, he had legal authorization to persecute Christians wherever he found them. And I think let this serve as a warning to Americans. There is such thing as legal persecution.
Mm-hmm.
Of Christians, and it happens all over the country. Not all over. I'm sorry, not this country. It happens all over the world.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen in America very often.
Big thing in China.
Yeah, big thing in China. But just keep that in mind that it does happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, it's still going on.
So with Paul, I'm sorry, Saul. He's on his way to Damascus, and he has an experience where he becomes Paul. But he claims to have this experience where he sees the risen Jesus, and immediately after this, he becomes a follower of Christ. So much so, he ends up baptized, and actually ends up being accredited or acknowledged by the original 12 disciples as well, who were eyewitnesses to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
and they acknowledge Paul as an apostle as well. He ends up writing these letters to churches that he planted. It's believed that he planted some 14 churches. That needs to be confirmed, but I believe it's believed that Paul planted some 14 churches.
Mm-hmm.
And his letters that he wrote to these churches, which can be found in the New Testament of the Bible, account for more than half of the New Testament. He ends up suffering several imprisonments, beatings, and actually is eventually martyred for his faith as well. He ended up beheaded by the Romans.
Jeez.
And so the question becomes, what event, what experience can account for such a miraculous change to go from kill the Christians where I find them to proclaim the name of Jesus even unto my death?
Mm-hmm. So from killing them to being killed for the belief he was killing people for. That is a radical switch,
Mm-hmm.
a radical transformation in perspective. And personally, I can't think of what would even behoove someone to switch their perspective so drastically on that sort of thing, except for a miraculous and radical event of having an encounter with Christ.
Right. And so there are some alternative theories to some of these minimal facts. We actually have a short video coming out
Mhm.
relatively soon with Truth Seeker Apologetics. Shout out to Dave over at Truth Seeker Apologetics. We got a collab video coming out with him soon where we're going to discuss some of the alternative theories
Mhm.
to some of these minimal facts. But what I wanted to do before we end, Dylan, now that we've gone through these 6 minimal facts for the evidence of the resurrection.
Sure.
It's been an intellectual conversation for the most part, right?
Yeah.
I think it would I think we'd be remiss not to make this personal.
Absolutely.
And what I mean by that is uh it's one thing to know the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, and that's all great and dandy. It's important. Apologetics in and of itself is important.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the danger that we run into oftentimes in apologetics is we leave it at the intellectual and hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not until it becomes personal that true conversion takes place.
Absolutely. A lot of people can miss heaven by 16 inches.
Yeah.
That's the distance from the head to the heart.
Yeah. And we want to be careful on this platform not to get so caught up in the intellectual that we miss the spiritual and the personal.
Mm-hmm. The reason for it all.
The reason for it all, which is very much personal. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to make it personal. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Yes, he did. I believe he did. I believe the evidence is very, very strong that he did.
Mm-hmm.
But the question becomes, why did Jesus have to die in the first place?
Yeah, it's a fair question.
Well, if I were to make it personal, make it about Jaylen, the reason Jesus died in the first place was to be a substitute for Jaylen's sin. Well, what sins has Jaylen committed that deserve such punishment? Jaylen stands before God guilty of lying, guilty of stealing, guilty of sexual immorality, guilty of lust, guilty of greed, guilty of pride, guilty of arrogance, self-righteousness, and probably other sins that I can't think of right now. But in all this sinning that I've done in my life, I've accumulated a debt with God that I myself cannot pay. I can't accumulate the whatever compensation he wants for it. And if I could accumulate it, he probably wouldn't even accept it from me because of how tainted I am. So what does God do with Jaylen then? He decides to demonstrate his love for Jaylen in the fact that while Jaylen was yet lying, while Jaylen was yet lusting after women, while Jaylen was yet stealing, while Jaylen was yet prideful, while he was yet self-righteous, Christ dies for Jaylen. And the beauty of it all is not only does Christ die for Jaylen, he dies for Jaylen while Jaylen is the one that's nailing him to the cross. What do you mean by that? What do you mean I never nailed him to the cross? Well, I'll tell you how I nailed Christ to the cross. Every lie I told was a nail. Every prideful and arrogant thought I had was a nail. Every lustful thought I had, every time I lusted after a woman, and though I may not have touched her physically, I touched her. I slept with her in my mind. That's a whole episode for another time, by the way. I know a lot of times we think, oh, because I haven't touched anybody that I'm sexually pure.
Yeah, but where does it start?
You sleep with somebody in your mind way before you touch them physically. You already did it in your mind. You just what physically happens. You're just acting out what you've already did up here. It's just coming out now.
That's a whole other episode. That'll be exciting.
Yeah. We'll get to that in a second. But for every sin that I committed, that was a nail. Unknowingly to Jaylen, though, while I'm nailing Christ to the cross with my sin, Christ is saying, Father, forgive Jaylen, because he don't know what he's doing. And the beauty of the gospel is, even in our arrogance, my own pride, this sinful nature that I can't seem to shake, this guy thought I was worth dying for.
Wow.
He thought of the idea to condescend himself, to become a human being, to come get me. Wow. I mean, it just leaves me absolutely speechless when I put it that way. But the beautiful part about it is, not only did he die for me because of my sin, so that I can stand before God holy and just, holy and just through him, not of my own standing. But he rose from the dead. He did something that nobody before him had ever been able to do, to prove that he was God. And so that now, this person that died for me, so that I can have right relationship with God, I now can have and enjoy relationship with him as well. And I look forward to the day when I'm able to tell him thank you in person. And that's the gift that the resurrection offers us.
And one might ask, how could someone receive that gift? And I think something that's really beautiful about the gospel is there's not a price tag to be in relationship with Christ. And what I mean by that, I couldn't work enough hours at my jobs to pay for my debt. There's not enough that I could physically do to prove my worthiness for God. But it's beautiful because by placing my faith in Christ as the substitution, but not only that, as my Lord and the Lord, and I specify the part because he was Lord before I ever accepted him.
Yeah.
Christ. He was the creator and sustainer of all things before I knew what that even was, before I recognized that fact. So when I recognized him as the Lord and accepted that, and I just put him in charge, and I'm going to do my best to follow him, and I'm going to mess up a lot along the way, but I'm going to apologize, ask for forgiveness, and pick back up and keep going by trusting in Christ. You are saved. It is a beautiful gift that is not earned. And it's truly glorious that it's not a title that I can earn. It is something that is freely given to us.
Yeah.
And it just blows my mind that it is such a bad deal on God's part when you think about it.
It's such a bad deal.
Like,
it really is.
You're doing all this for me? Like, now I heard the song recently and describing God's love, saying, your love is better than silver, it's better than gold, it's better than anything I've ever known. Why, God? Why you love me? I'll never know.
Mm-hmm.
And we think about the infantness,
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying that right,
Sure.
of who God is and how great his love is. And with that, God is also just, but out of his love, he is also merciful and recognizes I could never satisfy his justice. And so instead, he sends Christ to pay for it. And all I got to do is trust and follow him. And yet somehow I get the credit. It blows my mind.
Yeah, I like the way the Bible puts it. The Bible says in the book of Romans, but God demonstrated his love for us in this.
But it's a giant but.
That is but God demonstrated his love for us in this while we were yet sinners. Yet sinners. So we are still in our sin. I'm still rebelling against God. I have not come to know him. I'm not acknowledging him in any way, shape, or form. He dies for me. Christ dies so that one day, with the hopes of one day, Jaylen might want a relationship.
Yeah,
So
he saw me and my gluttonous behavior, my self-righteousness. He saw me in my drug addiction, and yet he still died for me. And it blows my mind, especially when I look at my own life. And I didn't notice in the moment, but all of these, we could even call them love letters or signs or ways God was, I feel like, trying to speak to me that I was blind at the moment to see.
Sure.
The times that as a young agnostic teenager would pray to God, whatever I thought that meant. And then I sometimes or oftentimes did get what I asked for, and I just kind of went about my day, didn't ever think about it again until I was in trouble. This sort of extortion of God, which is just so pitiful to even think about. With all of that in mind, God died for me to bring me back home, despite my lasciviousness, my arrogance, besides all of it.
Yeah, it's like I like the way you put it. When you put it before we started recording, when you said it's a beautiful truth, and that if it's just truth, then you might miss the beauty in it. But if it's just beautiful,
who cares? It's not true.
If no one cares if it's not true. But Christ and his mission and what he did for us is a beautiful truth.
And it's for by grace you have been saved through faith. So grace is something unearned. I didn't do anything to get it.
Nope.
And it's not from me. It's not from yourselves. It is a gift from God. And that's the gospel right there. It's nothing. That's technically not from the gospel. It's from Ephesians 2:8. But
same thing.
That summarizes the gospel about why it is so beautiful and why not only intellectually you can believe that Christ raised from the dead, but from your heart you can trust him and he will guide you.
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful way to end this episode, as a matter of fact. My friends, once again, make sure that you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you like and follow us on Facebook. I am your co-host, Jaylen Thompson.
Dylan Schweitzer.
And as always, for the kingdom.